Lock in, twin. Lock in. Daredevil Born Again is 4 for 4, so you already know we have to talk about it. For starters, we get a proper introduction of Ava Ayala, who is the niece of Hector Ayala, aka the White Tiger. For those who aren't familiar with the character, Ava is the niece of Hector, and she becomes the new White Tiger after Hector passes away. And I'm not gonna lie to you, whoever this actor is portraying Ava is phenomenal. Like, this is our first introduction of her as Ava Ayala, and she put on a performance of a lifetime. So I'm really excited to see where she takes the character in the future, because her acting was just impeccable. Up next, I want to talk about the relationship between Wilson Fisk and his wife Vanessa. This is probably one of the most interesting dynamics that I've seen in film in a very long time. For starters, number one, I would like to point out the seating of the therapy session that they have. Because if you remember in the previous episode, Vanessa was sitting on the far left of the couch, far away from Wilson as possible. But now she is sitting in the middle of the couch, a little bit closer to Wilson Fisk. Now, to me, this visually represents a little bit of progress. Because although she is sitting closer to Wilson, her body language is not fucking with Wilson right now. And the reason why I'm really loving this dynamic and the way this relationship is written is because it's very unique in the sense of that, in my opinion, in my viewpoint, I think they both want the same thing, but how they get to that end goal is very different. And that is what creates the divide between them. Now, Wilson may be a monster, and he himself acknowledges that, but one thing he don't play about is his wife. Wilson loves his wife so much that he is willing to do anything to keep her, both in healthy and unhealthy ways. And I think the reason why their relationship is on thin ice right now is because when they first met, Vanessa wasn't in a position of power the same way that Wilson was in the past. But after Wilson left and came back and became mayor, now she is in the position of power that Wilson Fisk is. So now that she has responsibilities and she's basically the big boss, her viewpoints on relationships, more specifically the relationship she has with Wilson, is going to be different. But now Wilson has to learn to adapt to that and learn how to navigate a relationship with this newfound woman. Next, let's talk about Leroy Bradford. Honestly, in my opinion, one of the saddest parts about this episode. Now, Leroy was arrested at a bodega for stealing, like, some boxes of cereal or some shit like that. And long story short, Matt Murdock ends up being assigned to be his lawyer. Now, originally, he was gonna get locked up for 30 days, but Matt Murdock ended up negotiating and brought it down to 10 days. But Leroy was asking for probation. He doesn't want to be locked up at all. So when Matt Murdock got back to him with the news and say, hey, good news, I took it from 30 days to 10 days of incarceration, he really thought that's something to celebrate. But then Leroy has given one of the most profound monologues that I've seen in a television show in a very long time. And I'm not going to state what he says because this video is going to be long, so I'm just going to paraphrase what he says. But he didn't want to be locked up because he feels like he's trapped in the system. He doesn't want to be locked up because it's going to be this never-ending cycle. And the justice system, because it's so corrupt and so broken, they're going to keep him in that cycle for as long as possible. And it's so sad, and the line that broke my heart is when he said that the US would rather spend more money keeping me in jail than letting me steal a box of cereal to feed me. Like, that was so sad. I had to pause the video and take a break. Because me as a black man living in America, I can't help but to think that this is so true. Obviously, I'm stuck in a system in different ways than Leroy, but still, it's the broken system. Up next, I want to talk about this scene right here. Not a lot of people are talking about this scene, but this scene is a lot more important than you think. I want to talk about the dynamic between Daniel and Wilson Fisk. Now, in the beginning of the video, Daniel went out for some drinks with BB and another friend, and he got super drunk and, leaked some information about Wilson Fisk and his candidacy as the mayor. Obviously, BB took that information, wrote an article about it, and released it to the public. Wilson found out, and he was really upset. Daniel stepped up, and he was just like, I'm so sorry, it's all my fault. And he was genuinely over-apologetic about his mistake, and it felt like he was willing to, sacrifice his life to Wilson as punishment. This boy Daniel is so loyal to Wilson, it's not even funny. And the one part of the scene that really stood out to me is Shayla herself in the background, because her reaction speaks volumes. So after Daniel basically confessed to Wilson about his mistake, Wilson basically forgives him, but he says, if you ever try this again, you're done. Now, the reaction that Shayla had, it was really interesting because the camera basically focuses on her. It doesn't really zoom in on her. It basically focuses on her, and her reaction is just full of concern. she saw firsthand how much power Wilson has over people, even without flexing his power. So not only is she concerned for the city about a man like this being in power, but she's also concerned for people like Daniel who blindly follow this man. Now, you know I can't talk about this episode without talking about the dialogue exchange between Frank Castle and Matt Murdock. Because not only was this the best writing that Marvel will ever see, but this is perfection at its finest when it comes to acting. When I tell you Jon Bernthal delivers as Frank Castle, he fucking delivers. Now, in this exchange, Matt Murdock ends up finding the bullet that ends up killing Hector Ayala. And that leads into like this underground layer beneath like an apartment building somewhere. And here we get our full introduction of Frank Castle. Now, this dialogue is very important because Frank Castle is, you know, looked at as a monster or even an outlaw because he is unapologetic about who he is. In a world that we live in where we're constantly suppressing who we are, that seems crazy. That seems outlandish. And the reason why I'm saying that, because the first few episodes of Daredevil Born Again, this is basically just a character arc about Wilson Fisk and Matt Murdock suppressing their true selves when it comes to being Daredevil and being the Kingpin. But what this conversation does is Frank Castle sees that Matt Murdock is suppressing his true identity, more specifically, him being Daredevil. And in this dialogue, Frank is basically pushing Matt Murdock to actually admit that Daredevil will always be a part of him. And more importantly, it's not just a part of you, it's an extension of who you are. Now, traditionally, vigilantes basically view their alter ego as a different person. And honestly, that's true. But what this TV show does so well is challenging that concept and challenging that viewpoint. And what this episode does, more specifically in this dialogue exchange, it basically challenges that viewpoint because it basically lets us know, like, hey, what if our vigilante alter ego is, you know, us? Like, you know what I'm saying? This whole exchange was pure cinema. Absolutely pure cinema. Now, lastly, I want to talk about how we have our first introduction of Muse. Now, I want to talk about Muse as a character, but I feel like because of the social media terms and services, I quite literally can't, because this is one of the most gruesome villains that I've seen in a comic book in a very long time, and yes, it is that bad. So to put things a little bit in perspective about how gruesome this character is, you see his eyes and the drip down his cheek. That's real human blood. So, yeah, that should give you a little bit of an insight about how crazy this character is. Anyways, as per usual, let me know what you guys think. Stay woke, have a great day. I'll see you next week for episode 5.